Her gaze was a lightning bolt, her stride an earthquake that shook every runway to its core. Naomi Campbell wasn't just a model, she was an uncontainable phenomenon. They called her the Black Panther, and when she appeared, the entire world halted to behold her reign. But behind that title lurked another truth. Naomi didn't just pry open doors that seemed sealed forever. She also shouldered the brutal weight of fame, of relentless demands, of a system that worshipped her even as it devoured her alive. Her life is an eternal dance between glory and the abyss, between the woman who etched history into the world of fashion and the one hounded by scandals, rage, and excesses. To some, Naomi was the muse who shattered racism with the sheer force of her beauty. To others, she was the emblem of an untamable spirit, as feared as she was revered. Was she a goddess of flesh and bone, or a prisoner of her own demons? This is the story of how a London girl transformed into the most dreaded and desired supermodel on the planet, a journey through blinding lights and endless shadows, because behind every immortal photograph lies a truth few dare to tell. Naomi Elaine Campbell was born in Streatham, a neighborhood in South London, on the 22nd of May 1970. From the very beginning, her life was etched by absence and struggle. Her mother, Valerie Morris, a dancer of Jamaican roots, raised Naomi alone, as her biological father vanished even before her birth. That paternal void was no mere footnote. It morphed into a silent wound that shadowed Naomi through every chapter of her life, forging her fierce, proud character and sometimes its explosive fire. She grew up in humble surroundings, enveloped by the multicultural pulse of 1972nd London. Caribbean rhythms throbbed through the streets. Black communities clawed for space in a society still shackled by prejudice. And Naomi, with her ebony skin and coiled curls, learned young that not every gaze would hold admiration, but she would never lower hers. Her mother, stern and fiercely protective, instilled discipline through dance. Naomi attended the Italia Conti Stage School, where she honed her body into a vessel for storytelling. There, she discovered that every gesture could be art, that poise and stare could whisper volumes unspoken. But the girl practicing pliés before the mirror dreamed vast, even without knowing it. At just 7 years old, she burst into Bob Marley's music video, dancing with the effortless grace of one already sensing her pull toward the lens. She wasn't yet the supermodel, but her bond with the spotlight had ignited long before the world caught fire to her name. In school, Naomi stood apart. Her features made her a beacon, her temperament a storm unlike the rest. While other girls faded into the background, Naomi radiated a cocktail of unyielding confidence and raw rebellion. Sometimes adored, other times misunderstood. That duality, beloved yet feared, would echo relentlessly through her career. Fate, that whimsical beast, lay in wait on an ordinary afternoon. At just 15, strolling through Covent Garden, she was spotted by Beth Bolt, head of the Synchro Model agency. In a heartbeat, her world spun into irreversible orbit. What might have been a lucky whim for many a teen became, for Naomi, the first spark of a blaze that would soon engulf the fashion realm. Yet behind that golden chance lurked trials no ordinary girl could fathom. Naomi didn't just battle the crush of an industry ruled by Eurocentric beauty ideals. She bore the crushing mantle of representing an entire generation of Black women in a world still barricading its gates. The Streatham girl, forged in dance's rigor and multicultural streets, teetered on the brink of an ocean roiling with light and shadow. The mirror would cease to be her harshest judge. From that moment, a million eyes across the globe would dissect her with every stride. And as she geared up for her first photo shoot, Naomi couldn't yet know it, but the fashion world would never be the same after her passage. Naomi was barely 15 when she first stepped before a camera's lens. It was 1985, and the offer felt too colossal for a teenager who, until then, had dreamed of dancing. But that first shutter snap ignited a fire that would never fade. Her lithe frame, feline features, and untamed energy seized attention instantly. It wasn't just beauty, it was attitude, the way Naomi seemed to defy the lens, daring anyone who gazed upon her to look away. Soon, her name echoed through the corridors of London's modeling agencies. The Streatham girl had stormed into a savage realm, the fashion world of the 1980 seconds, a universe swelling with ambition, where models were morphing into global stars. But if it was a battlefield for white girls, for Naomi, it was a far fiercer war she had to carve her path in an industry unaccustomed to celebrating dark skin. Her first major cover came in 1986, gracing British Elle at just 16, shattering the mold. That image was more than a debut, it was a declaration of war against the racial prejudices still gripping fashion's throat. It marked the start of a silent fight, a battle where Naomi, unwittingly, became a symbol. At every casting, Naomi arrived with a cocktail of teenage insecurity and raw ferocity. Some directors dismissed her outright. Too exotic, they muttered. Others, captivated by her singularity, saw her as the face of a future still hard to fathom. Silently, she learned to toughen her skin. Every no became fuel to prove she was destined to rule the runways. Her dance training gifted her a command of her body unmatched by any model. When she walked, it wasn't a mere strut. It was a magnetic dance, pulsing with power. That energy set her apart, making her an obsession for photographers chasing not just a picture, but a myth in the making. Yet glamour came at a cost. Behind the flashes lay hours of solitude, cutting remarks, and suffocating discipline. Naomi quickly grasped that beauty alone wasn't enough in fashion. You had to endure weather comparisons, swallow ruthless critiques, and stand tall even when crumbling inside. In Paris, Milan, and New York, where racism was even more entrenched in the industry, Naomi faced moments of humiliation. Designers refused to dress her. Editors claimed a black model wouldn't sell magazines. Brands sidelined her from campaigns. But then came unexpected allies, luminaries like Yves Saint Laurent and Gianni Versace, who saw beyond a pretty face. They saw a revolution brewing. With every runway she conquered, Naomi sent a message. She wasn't just there to walk, she was there to stay. Every applause, every cover, every feline step struck a blow against prejudice. The discovery of that London teenager was no fluke. It was the spark of a storm that would forever reshape fashion's skies. And as the world began to whisper her name, Naomi was already bracing for the next leap. From promise to legend. The late 80s and early 90s roared in like an unstoppable whirlwind. Naomi Campbell was no longer the girl unearthed in Covent Garden. She was a hurricane slicing through London, Paris, Milan, and New York with a presence no one could dismiss. Her feline stride became an unmistakable signature. She didn't merely walk the runway. She devoured it with every predatory step. Soon, her face blanketed the covers of the most exalted magazines, Vogue, Time, Harper's Bazaar, Elle. She was a phenomenon, not just for her extraordinary beauty, but because she embodied something vast beyond herself. A cultural triumph. Naomi Campbell shattered the racial barriers fashion had upheld for decades, wielding a blend of ironclad discipline and untamable spirit. In 1988, she etched herself into history as the first black model to grace the cover of French Vogue. It was no small feat. It was an earthquake in an industry wedded to a singular European canon. Yves Saint Laurent, one of the designers who'd always championed her, had threatened to yank his ads from the magazine if Naomi wasn't featured. That cover ignited a new paradigm. Black beauty could no longer be sidelined. But her ascent didn't halt there. Alongside Cindy Crawford, Linda Evangelista, Claudia Schiffer, and Christy Turlington, Naomi forged the Big Five, the supermodels who transmuted the trade into a global spectacle. They were no longer mere mannequins. They were cultural icons, women who packed stadiums and sparked headlines like rock stars. Naomi dazzled in Versace, Chanel, and Dolce & Gabbana campaigns, becoming the muse to Azzedine Alea, who cherished her like a daughter. At every show, photographers clashed to seize her feline silhouette. Every appearance was an event. No matter who else prowled the catwalk, when Naomi moved, the rest faded into oblivion. Yet that meteoric rise exacted a toll. Fame cloaked her in an aura of untouchability that, even as it elevated her, stirred envy and whispers. The media painted her as the toughest supermodel, yet the most demanding. And though she smiled like a goddess in the spotlight, in private, the relentless demands, the crushing pressure, and the gnawing solitude began carving invisible scars. The world hailed her glory. Designers deemed her indispensable. Magazines courted her as the face of a dawning era. Naomi Campbell, that Streatham teenager, was no longer just a model. She was an emblem of raw power. But what no one knew was that, in the shadows, storms were brewing tempests that would test every triumph she'd claimed. Perfection gleams with a blinding radiance, but casts a shadow that consumes. For Naomi Campbell, her meteoric rise bore an unbearable burden. The relentless need to prove she deserved her crown. Beauty alone wasn't enough, she had to be flawless. Being the first wasn't enough, she had to be the best. The fashion industry is a realm built on illusions. Dresses shimmer, lights dazzle, cameras cheer. But behind every cover lay hours of exhaustion, punishing diet regimens, endless flights, and nights where sleep eluded Naomi. Her body had to stay lean, strong, perfect, even if that perfectionism pushed her to the brink of collapse. Racism, though quieter now, lingered like a specter. Despite her fame, some brands hesitated to book her for global campaigns because of her skin's hue. Certain international magazines shunned her from covers, fearing she wouldn't sell. These veiled rejections cut deep, and Naomi wielded the only weapon she knew: fury. On every runway, her stride grew fiercer, as if roaring to the world, "I'm here, and you cannot erase me." But the toll wasn't just external. Naomi began to buckle under the weight of crushing self-demand. Any weakness was unthinkable. Her smile had to be impeccable, her skin unblemished, her charisma ever magnetic, and when the pressure became unbearable, cracks appeared. Outbursts of rage at assistants, clashes with peers, rumors the press amplified with vicious glee. The woman who embodied absolute power on the catwalk privately wrestled with profound insecurities. The absence of a father, the grit of a childhood without privilege, the demands of a world that only embraced her if she was extraordinary, all of it churned into an emotional tempest. Addictions began to circle her life like a poisoned refuge. Alcohol, drugs, endless parties, a mirage to escape exhaustion and the ghosts that stalked her. Each night of excess seemed to give her wings, but by dawn, those wings turned to chains. The world saw only the surface, the supermodel who set trends, the woman who seemed invincible. No one cared to peer at the pain buried beneath the makeup and designer gowns. And Naomi, fiercely proud, never asked for help. She'd rather be called the most feared than reveal a hint of vulnerability. Thus, the price of perfection wasn't paid in coin, but in invisible wounds. Naomi knew it, though she'd never confess. Behind the goddess was a woman weary of bearing the myth's mask, and what came next would prove that even the most powerful supermodel in the world could not outrun the fall. Naomi Campbell's myth wasn't forged solely on the runways, it was etched in screaming headlines. If her stride was fire across the catwalk, her temper offstage was dynamite. The press christened her the Furious Model, a moniker that shadowed her every step. Stories piled up, phones hurled at assistants, fiery clashes in airports, spats with peers. Each incident became a media feast. Tabloids reveled in painting her as a capricious diva, untamed and uncontrollable. But behind that caricature was a woman carrying the rage of years of slights, covert racism, impossible demands. Her fury wasn't mere whim, it was a wound bleeding in the open. Excesses fueled the fire. Endless parties in New York, London, and Milan swept her into a vortex of alcohol and drugs. In those late nights, Naomi sought what fame denied her: rest, oblivion, a fleeting breath. But each reckless dawn broke darker than the last. Her face, meant to dazzle flawlessly in campaigns, began to betray traces of wear, and the industry, so swift to crown, was just as quick to spotlight her stumble. More than once, Naomi faced courtrooms, assault charges, fines, community service. The world watched, transfixed, as the untouchable supermodel bowed before judges, offering public apologies. Every snapshot of her sweeping streets in orange coveralls was a brutal reminder. Even icons could be humbled. The media branded her a monster. Covers shifted from her elegance to her eruptions. The myth of perfection began to crack. Yet, with every fall, Naomi seemed to rise fiercer, as if scandal itself fueled her return to dominate the runway. But that roller coaster exacted a devastating emotional toll. Loneliness deepened, romances flickered and faded, trust in others crumbled to ash. The woman who seemed invincible to millions was, in private, vulnerable, fragile, trapped between her demons and the world's merciless judgment. The worst was yet to come. For the abyss, that chasm where so many plummet when they believe they've reached the summit, was beginning to yawn beneath her feet. The abyss doesn't strike all at once. It yawns open slowly, inch by inch, until one day you find yourself teetering on the edge, staring into the void. For Naomi Campbell, that moment crashed in during the late 90s and early 2000s, when the image of the Black Panther began to clash with her greatest foe, herself. The excesses were no longer whispers, they were truths impossible to cloak. Naomi checked into rehab clinics to confront her addictions to drugs and alcohol, a war she'd later own with raw honesty years down the line. The woman who seemed unbreakable on the runway confessed to nights when she didn't want to wake. It was the cruelest paradox. While the world worshipped her, she was quietly consuming herself from within. The courtroom scandals multiplied like shadows at dusk. In 2000, she was convicted and ordered to cover her assistant's medical treatments after a violent outburst. In 2006, she was arrested in New York for hurling a phone at another assistant's head. That image of Naomi, handcuffed and marching into a precinct, became iconic, not for glamour, but for the spectacle of the plunge. The abyss was no longer metaphor. It was real, and she was sinking into it before millions of eyes. The industry, merciless as ever, seemed to turn its back. Some designers stopped calling, magazines pared down her appearances, and a new wave of models surged in with fresh fire. Naomi found herself trapped between two realms, the glorious past that forged her myth, and a present shoving her toward oblivion. In her personal life, instability reigned unchecked. Fleeting romances, shattered friendships, betrayals, and distrust. Naomi couldn't find safe harbor even in her innermost circle. The fatherless void from her childhood, that old scar, seemed to rip open with every disillusionment. But perhaps the most shattering was the loneliness. Surrounded by cameras, parties, and admirers, Naomi dwelled isolated in a bubble of suspicion. No one knew where the goddess ended, and the woman began. And in that hollow, the demons always slithered back. Yet Naomi possessed something that set her apart, a ferocious resilience. Even in the abyss, even amid public humiliation, she never stopped staring ahead. She could be broken, but never beaten. And that strength, though scarred, would be the spark to yank her from the jaws of forgetfulness. Because, as in every grand tragedy, the abyss wasn't the end. It was the dawn of possible redemption. To fall is human, but to rise again, that's what forges a myth. Naomi Campbell, after weathering trials, rehab stints, and vicious headlines, began to carve a different path. It wasn't easy. Every attempt to rise seemed tethered to the shadow of her past, yet still, she insisted on standing tall. In 2008, after serving community service for yet another violent episode, the world glimpsed an unexpected image. Naomi, clad in a gray uniform, sweeping New York streets under the glare of dozens of cameras. Many saw it as humiliation. But in that scene, there was something more. Proof that even the Black Panther could be vulnerable, could own her mistakes. That contradiction, far from breaking her, began to humanize her in the public's eyes. Her return to the runways was met with curiosity, and against all odds, roaring ovations. In 2010, she strode for Dolce & Gabbana, celebrating 25 years in the game. The thunder of applause was a reminder. Though the world had tried to topple her, Naomi still held the power to mesmerize with every step. The myth endured. But this time, her rebirth wasn't solely tied to fashion. Naomi threw herself into humanitarian causes, championing campaigns against poverty in Africa and founding Fashion for Relief, organizing charity runway shows to raise funds for humanitarian crises. The gesture stunned many. The woman infamous for her fiery temper was now wielding her influence to lift up those in dire need. She also found a new stage in television. As a judge and mentor on shows like The Face, Naomi revealed another side, demanding, yes, but fiercely protective of young women chasing modeling dreams. Beneath her tough critiques lay a truth. No one knew the cost of that path better than she did, and her words carried warnings cloaked as lessons. Her presence on social media and her bond with new generations of designers reclaimed her spot in pop culture. Naomi was no longer just the supermodel of the 90s. She was a figure who spanned decades without losing relevance. Her rebirth wasn't about erasing her past, but learning to coexist with it. Of course, the demons didn't vanish entirely. Rumors, occasional outbursts, and conflicts still flared in headlines. But there was a shift. Naomi no longer tried to hide her scars. She realized her legacy wasn't in perfection, but in the relentless fight to rise, again and again, before the watching world. Thus, the supermodel who teetered on the abyss's edge began to pen a new narrative, that of a woman who, despite everything, refused to surrender. A woman who, with every stride on the runway, proved that a fall wasn't the end, but the spark of another battle. To speak of Naomi Campbell's legacy is to speak of a silent revolution that roared like thunder through the fashion world. Her name isn't merely that of another supermodel in the 90s firmament. Naomi is, and will forever be, a turning point. A force that compelled fashion to confront its own reflection and acknowledge that beauty cannot be confined to one color, one silhouette, one voice. With her mere presence, she shattered racial barriers that seemed unbreakable. Before her, few Black models had graced the covers of international magazines or become muses for legendary designers. Naomi didn't just reach those heights. She did so with blazing brilliance, conquering Vogue, Time, and the runways of Paris, Milan, and New York. Every time she appeared on a prestigious magazine cover, she wasn't just representing herself, she stood for thousands of women who had been rendered invisible until then. Her stride, sharp and magnetic, became a masterclass. Entire generations of models studied her glide down the runway, that inimitable blend of dance, defiance, and seduction, impossible to replicate. Naomi didn't walk. She dominated. She turned every show into a spectacle, every appearance into an event. Even today, when she steps onto a stage, the audience knows they're witnessing history. She was the muse of iconic designers. Gianni Versace adored her. Azzedine Alaïa cherished her like a daughter. Yves Saint Laurent championed her against a system still reluctant to embrace her. Her bond with fashion wasn't just professional, it was intimate, emotional, woven with loyalties and betrayals. In every connection, she left an indelible mark. Beyond that, Naomi redefined what it meant to be a supermodel. Before her, models were silent mannequins. Afterward, they became global celebrities, commanding headlines like movie stars or singers. Alongside her contemporaries, the Big Five, Naomi transformed fashion into pop culture, a media spectacle, a planetary phenomenon. Her influence stretches far beyond the past. New generations from Jourdan Dunn to Adut Akich hail Naomi as the pioneer who blazed a trail for their faces, bodies, and stories to be celebrated. She became a mirror in which other women could see themselves reflected with pride. Even off the runway, her legacy endures. Through fashion for relief, she wielded fashion as a tool for social change, proving beauty could be a weapon for justice. With every public appearance, her bold style and untamable spirit remind the world that fashion isn't just clothing, it's power, identity, politics. Ultimately, Naomi Campbell's legacy isn't built solely on iconic photographs or unforgettable covers. It's forged from battles won against exclusion, scars turned into emblems, and a force that drove the industry to evolve. Naomi wasn't just a model. She was and is a living manifesto that fashion is never the same after a true panther prowls its stage. Naomi Campbell's story isn't just that of a supermodel who scaled the heights of glamour. It's a brutal mirror reflecting what it means to live under the crushing weight of perfection. Her life reminds us that fame is a double-edged sword. It grants power, recognition, and timeless beauty. But it also devours, erodes, and demands a price few are willing or able to pay. Naomi embodies that duality. Adored by millions, she was also branded as a symbol of fury and excess. She strode with unshakable command down runways that seemed like altars, while in private, she battled addictions, loneliness, and invisible wounds. The woman and the icon were perpetually at odds, forcing her to wage a constant struggle to reconcile the two. Her message, though, isn't one of defeat, but of resilience. Naomi fell time and again, and with each stumble, the world watched with morbid fascination, anticipating her end, yet she always returned. That indomitable spirit, both feared and revered, is the heart of her legacy. It teaches us that greatness isn't measured by the absence of mistakes, but by the courage to rise after every fall. Perfection, Naomi seems to tell us, isn't found in a svelte figure or a flawless cover. True perfection lies in embracing scars, forging them into strength, and pressing forward even when the world bets on your failure. Her life is a testament that behind every icon is a human who weeps, errs, and seeks love and redemption. Today, when we see her still commanding runways or starring in campaigns, it's not just her beauty we admire. It's her resilience, her ability to reinvent herself, her strength to face the world head-on and declare, "I'm still here, and I won't surrender." That is Naomi Campbell's true message. Perfection may not exist, but the will to keep fighting, that is eternal. Naomi Campbell is, at once, glory and caution. The woman who conquered impossible runways, who shattered walls of racism with the sheer force of her gaze, who became an icon of feminine power in a world engineered to exclude her. But she is also the woman who tasted fame's cruelest underbelly, who plummeted into abysses of scandals, addictions, and solitudes that threatened to annihilate her. Her life is an odyssey where beauty falls short, where success is never enough, where perfection exacts a toll far too steep. And yet, Naomi stands unbowed. For in every fall, she found a way to rise. In every wound, she discovered fresh skin. In every judgment, she learned to face the mirror with a deeper truth. Fame bestowed everything upon her: wealth, power, acclaim. And it stripped it all away too: peace, privacy, trust. But from that contradiction sprang her true legacy, that of a woman who never surrendered, who alchemized her mistakes into lessons, who forged her name into a synonym for resilience. Today, when Naomi graces a runway, the world doesn't see merely a supermodel. It sees a warrior, a woman who embodies beauty, yes, but also fragility, fury, defiance. An imperfect icon who, precisely through her imperfections, has become eternal. Because the question is no longer whether Naomi Campbell was a fashion goddess. The question now is, will she be remembered as an eternal myth or a painful memory? The answer perhaps lies with each of us. But one truth stands indisputable. After Naomi, fashion was never the same.